I'm delighted to present to you today ancient Jewish sources informing our current disabilities inclusion work as part of the Faith Inclusion Network. My name is Howard Blas. A little bit about me. If you look at this picture, you get a little bit of an introduction to me and to the Jewish religion. If you're unfamiliar, the context here is that I was leading a trip of people with disabilities to Israel. I'm going to tell you soon about my work with the Tikva program for Camp Ramah. That is what introduced me to this whole field of disabilities inclusion camping in 1984. Thankfully, I came to the job and I never left. It inspired me to go on to study social work and special education at the graduate level. I'm also a teacher. I've been working in camping and I'm a writer. I do lead disabilities trips to Israel, partly through Camp Ramah, my camping organization, and also through the Birthright Israel organization. I bring people with autism to Israel every year. And I consult to many different organizations in Israel. And I'm proudly a new board member for the Faith Inclusion Network. If you look at the picture, you will notice these are Jewish people. That's me in the background, my son in the foreground. And we are actually wearing two ritual objects which are derived from references in the Old Testament. The prayer shawl with the fringes are called tzitzit or a talit, and the boxes on the head and arms are called tefillin. More about that in a minute. Now, people tuning in to this presentation have various degrees of familiarity with Judaism and with the Jewish people. So some people are familiar with the Old Testament, okay? Some people are more familiar with the New Testament. The Old Testament familiarity may be that it's included as part of their own faith tradition. One important difference between Jewish religion and perhaps Christianity is that Jewish people find themselves bound by the laws of the Old Testament. Okay, in Judaism, we call that halacha, or Jewish law. That implies that there is a commander, that God is the commander. People are commanded, and the commandments in Judaism are known as mitzvot. And we traditionally, we say that we can derive 613 commandments from the Torah. That's why I playfully called this, Jews have been called the people of the book, as are other religions, but specifically, Jews are the people of the law book. In this picture, you may think that this is a reference to that wonderful 1981 Mel Brooks movie, History of the World. Actually, it's showing Moses on Mount Sinai carrying the 10 Commandments. There's a lot of questions about what actually happened on Mount Sinai. Did he receive the 10 Commandments? Did he receive the written Torah? I'm showing this to you because the Jewish idea, essentially, and there are many different interpretations, the idea was that Moses received the written Torah on Mount Sinai as well, and that's what he carried down. That's the scroll that you would see in a synagogue till this day. But up there with the written Torah, he also received the oral Torah. More about that in a few minutes. I've highlighted this. I've used yellow, green, and blue for the following reason. The Jewish Bible, we call the Tanakh, okay? The T is for Torah. It's an acronym. T is for Torah. The Na is for the word Nivi'im, which is prophets. And then the Ch is for the word Ketuvim, which means holy writings. And those include books like the Book of Esther and Psalms and other such books. Again, this is all by way of background to lead up to a number of Jewish sources that I want to talk you through that relate to disability inclusion. So as I was saying, up on Mount Sinai, we say that the written Torah was given, okay, as well as the oral Torah, which was the Mishnah. Now, the idea was that it was supposed to be oral, supposed to be passed down, not written down. Of course, like in the good old game of telephone, things that don't get written down sometimes get forgotten. So eventually, in the 100s, it was written down into the 6 orders of the Mishnah. They were organized by things like like business law and seasonal holidays, things like that. And eventually, all of those basic laws in the Mishnah were discussed over hundreds of years by the rabbis. And that's called the Gemara. Some of it is legal, some of it is stories and digressions and things like that. And actually, there are two versions. The more definitive is called the Babylonian Talmud. And again, this was not written down until about the year 500 or so CE. Again, an important distinction. In the Jewish religion, instead of referring to BC and to AD, we refer to the more historical periods, BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, Common Era, having no reference to Jesus in that designation. So if you studied your Bible and you studied your oral law, would you know what to do Jewishly? What's the bottom line law? And the answer is you would not, okay? So the tradition starts with the Torah, goes to the Talmud, then there are various codes. Different rabbis in different periods tried to organize these laws and get to the bottom line. But of course, there were variations by parts of the world, the Ashkenazic world, the more sort of Eastern European Jewish world, and the Sephardic world, Spain and North Africa. And there were just different opinions. And so even till today, if a Jewish person has a legal question, am I allowed to use an elevator on the Jewish Sabbath, for example, you would go to a rabbi and you would get a legal decision. Okay, so now how does this all relate to disabilities? For today, I'm going to present a roundup of sources from various books which inform our attitudes and practices with respect to people with disabilities. So the first source, which will probably be familiar to nearly everybody who's viewing, is the classic source that says about being created in God's image. So that the bottom line there is, if each person is created in the image of God, in Judaism we call this B'Tselem Elohim, then it implies that every single person has worth and value. Now that might not have felt so clear to Moses, who, as you know, when God approached him to be the leader, to go to Pharaoh, to ask the Hebrews to be released from Egyptian slavery, he tried to get out of this undertaking. He started talking about some type of speech disability that he had. He's not going to be a very good speaker. Why me, God? Of course, God outsmarts him and reminds him that God himself created him and created everybody. So I know that. I can see past that. You know, you'll be the leader with your brother who is the good speaker. But I make everyone, I know that, Moses. If we jump to another part of the Bible, to the book of the Holy Writings, to the book of Proverbs, this is a quote that I absolutely love. It says, "Chanoch lena'ar al pi darko," teach a child according to his way. We know that so well in modern education. Each person learns differently, has different strengths, need to educate each person differently. In my other life, I instruct a lot of Jewish children, especially those with various disabilities, in Jewish tradition, and prepare them for bar and bat mitzvah. So that's me in that picture. And, you know, as if we need to be told this, we have the famous line in Leviticus, not to place a stumbling block before a blind person or insult the deaf. This source, I will get back to a little bit later when we talk about a clever rabbinic workaround. This is a really troubling verse to many. While on one hand, we're talking about how each person is valued, these exclusions and disqualifications apply to the Kohen, to the priest, who would do the sacrifices in the portable temple and in the permanent temple, and any number of blemishes or defects would disqualify the person. Okay, so this is a troubling text. We'll get back to it. Other texts present what I would consider a very beautiful and true picture of inclusion in the Jewish tradition. We have this tradition that all people were present at Mount Sinai for the giving of the Torah, That means about 600,000 men past the age of 20, probably a total of 2 million people. So everybody was present. And then later, toward the very end of the book of Deuteronomy, it says, "Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Adonai," that everybody was standing before God, from the highest to the lowest, every single person, children, wives, stranger. It didn't matter what your job was. I think those are two beautiful sources about inclusion. Then in the book of Isaiah, we're told, look at the very bottom, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all people." Again, everybody is included. This is a biblical source that for many, many years in my camp room, I had posted on the door. We say this, it's from the book of Psalms. It's in a prayer that we, in the Jewish religion, called Hallel. We say on holidays and on the new month. It says, "Even ma'asu habonim hayta lerosh pinah." The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. So sometimes people who are rejected have amazing strengths and qualities and can become leaders. So to sum up some of these biblical sources until now, okay, everyone is created in God's image. We know that. Even great leaders have disabilities. There are many examples of that as well. I have a book by a woman named Ora Horn-Prauser. It's called Esau's Blessing: How the Bible Embraces Those with Special Needs. And it really talks about many biblical characters who may have been blind or may have had some type of intellectual disability who rose to great leadership. The third point, we have to treat each person with respect, whether it's through individualizing instruction or not putting obstacles. We did have the issue with the priest that we'll come back to. Everyone has a place at the table. And even some of the great leaders, as I said earlier, people destined to greatness, had their own disabilities. Now, I'd like to present a roundup of Talmudic sources. Now, remember, this is the oral tradition written down, 38 volumes, comprising 2,711 pages. And there is something in the Jewish religion called Daf Yomi, a page a day. And if you spend one day, each day you do one page of this, it would take 7 years and 5 months to complete. There's a big celebration when it's done for those who do it. One of my favorite troubling sources, just to give you a sense of what's going to come with these sources. Some, as I mentioned, some of the Talmud is stories and digressions, even insults, a lot of legal material. So some of them are not so nice, okay? But there's even one with a insensitive rabbi who insults a person. But there's also some sources that show tremendous sensitivity. We'll learn where the idea of not judging a book by its cover comes from in the rabbinic tradition, and more reminders that everyone is created by God. So this is the source I was mentioning. Basically, a certain rabbi, an esteemed rabbi, is coming through town, and a person looks up and he's extremely excited, and he says, peace be upon you, sir. It points out that the man was ugly, whatever that means. The rabbi did not want to be bothered, even looking at this person. He calls him reka, means empty or worthless. And he says, is everybody in this town as ugly as you are? And whether he felt insulted or hurt or not, he comes up with a great reply. He says, I don't know, but go tell it to the craftsman who made me. Tell it to my maker. Of course, that's all the rabbi needed to hear to realize he was very much in error. When he realized he was wrong, and he submits himself and says, forgive me. I won't forgive you till you go to my maker. Okay, so that's a beautiful source about a guide to clergy people of how not to treat other people. It's in our Talmud. Some other nicer sources. This is the source of not judging a book by its cover. Don't look into the jar, but rather what's in it. I think many of us know this source. This is in Hebrew. It's called Pirkei Avot, or Ethics of the Fathers. From the same book, we have what's called a rabbi named Ben Azi. He used to say, don't despise any man. Don't discriminate against anything, for there is no man that has not his hour, and no thing that has not his place. So everybody has their moment. Everybody has a reason for being on this planet. We're all God's creations. Let other people's dignity be as precious to you as your own. You see a theme here of beautiful sources. I like this one too. It brings us back to that original source from Genesis about being created in God's image. When a person stamps several coins with one seal, they are all similar to each other. But God stamped all people with the seal of Adam, the first man, as all of them are his offspring, and not one of them is similar to another. Therefore, since all humanity descends from one person, each and every person is obligated to say, the world was created for me, as one person can be the source of all humanity and recognize the significance of his actions. Really, really beautiful. We all come from the same source. Sorry, little problem with advancing the slides. I apologize. In one of the two Talmuds, there's a source that has been incorporated into the Passover Seder that Jewish people say. The son that it talks about the four sons, four different types of people, and one of them says the son does not know how to ask. What do? You start for him. Right? As one rabbi said, if there is no knowledge in the son, the father should teach him. So it doesn't matter. Each person is deserving of an education. There are many, many more sources. This is just a start. Okay, so far we've looked at the Bible, we've looked at the Talmud, and like I said, it's hard to know what's the bottom line here. So some other sources. The famous Rabbi Maimonides from the 1200s, Spain, in the Mishnah Torah, every member of the people of Israel is obligated to study Torah, whether one is rich or poor, physically able or with physical disability. This is me recently at a bar mitzvah of a student. This is the Old Testament in scroll form. It doesn't matter if the person has a learning disability or is wealthy or not, deserving of studying Torah. This is a much later, very famous rabbi, Martin Buber. Every person born into this world represents something new, something never existed before, something original and unique. It's the duty of every person to know and consider that he is unique in his own particular character and that there has never been anyone like him in the world. Another beautiful source. So now we're going to get back to that troubling source from Leviticus that disqualifies priests, because we're going to find out that seems to be true on the surface, but the rabbis were often clever. They lived in the real world and they found workarounds. So I'm going to suggest, maybe this is the key to the whole talk, that the key to changing attitudes is including people who are different, not keeping them out. So without going through the whole source, essentially it's discussing a ritual. It's called the priestly blessing. The Kohen would lift his hands and would bless the people. Okay, this till this day this happens in synagogues on certain holidays in America and every single day in Israel. And it's saying that the Mishnah, the source says that if a person has any type of deformity on his hands, he's not able to do the blessing. And the obvious reason is that people are going to be staring. Okay, and some extended it not just to his hands, but also to his face or his feet. People stare, and if they stare, they're going to be distracted. So that seems pretty straightforward. And then if you look at the yellow, we see that there were three different rabbis who say, wait a minute, I get that, I understand that, but practically speaking, in my town, we had a guy who should have been disqualified, but you know what? He did the job. So I don't get it. And they keep coming up with this principle. In the Hebrew it says, V'im hayadash be'iro mutar. Yeah, we get the exclusion stuff, but if the townspeople are accustomed to him, if he's just one of the people in the town, we don't, okay, whatever. He's Yonatan. He's not like the guy with intellectual disabilities, or he's not the blind guy. He's just Sam or Marvin, whatever. The second case is similar. Okay, if he had, we know a blind man shouldn't be able to lift up his hands. But wait a minute, wasn't there a story from this town of Rabbi Yochanan where the person was able to? Yeah. If the people are used to it, he's allowed to. And then finally, it says, a man whose hands are discolored, we know he shouldn't lift up his hands. But wait a minute, what if you live in a town of people who dye fabric for a living? That's his occupation. Of course, he'd be allowed to. So I think the point there, I'll look at this slide for a moment as I'm finishing up. The point is that the way to get used to something that you're not comfortable with is to be exposed to those people. It's not to exclude them, and it's not on them to have to make a case. So it doesn't matter if the person has a different color skin, or if the person has a different disability, the person's part of the LGBTQ plus community. It's really on us. And the more we're used to those kind of people, the more it's no big deal. So, which begs the question, is this all just theoretical, or is there a place, or are there places where this actually exists? So I want to kind of, come full circle. So back in 1984, I showed up at the summer camp called Camp Ramah in New England, in Palmer, Massachusetts, near Amherst, near Springfield. And I had no experience working with disabilities. And they thought I'd be a good match. I was rerouted from the kitchen to start working in the Tikva program. And I came to learn that in the late 1960s, a couple of special educators had this idea of including people with disabilities in a typical overnight summer camp. So summer camping is very, very popular in the Jewish religion. There are many camping movements within the conservative movement. Orthodox, conservative, and Reform are the big movements. Within conservative, we're about to celebrate our 75th year of camping. We've been including people with disabilities since 1970, and we serve about 12,000 campers per summer. And this Tikva program is a good example of inclusion at its best, meaning that there are people with and without disabilities in the same camping community. And because the program has been around since 1970, having people with disabilities is as natural as having yummy food on the Jewish Sabbath, or having swimming, or having color war. The picture on the left shows our camp in Canada, and people with disabilities who actually have a job training program and work in a coffee shop. And on the right is people with and without disabilities praying. You see he's holding the Siddur, a prayer book, and the tefillin, those boxes that are mentioned in the Bible, on his forehead. We use it in the morning service. So I do think that there are these places, these wonderful places in the world, in the Jewish world, where inclusion exists in a living kind of way. And to sort of bring it all together and conclude, I would say, coming back to our original topic, which was ancient Jewish sources that inform our disabilities inclusion work, I would say inclusion is mandated in our tradition, both the legal part and the ethical part. I think we're pretty consistent about sources favoring inclusion, though there are a couple of outliers. Some sources are more restrictive. There were some times where it said people who were blind or deaf or had an intellectual disability may have been exempt, but they usually come up with creative workarounds for inclusion. We continue to improve inclusive attitudes and actions in the Jewish world, in synagogues, in schools, in camps. February, still part of February, is JJAM, Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. Of course, every day, every month should be inclusion, but we make a point of having special activities during that month to raise awareness. And to finally conclude, I'm honored to share a little bit about our Jewish tradition in this wonderful faith inclusion network. And I'm happy to, consult or work or discuss inclusion in your communities if I could be of help. And my contact information is here. I have a website, howardblas.com. And please, if I could be of help, please reach out. Thank you so much for being part of this session, and enjoy the other sessions as part of the conference. Thank you.